Hi out there in webinar land. Welcome to the Birding a Wild Board Training webinar. I'm Jill Jackson. I'm the Director of Client Relations for the firm.
I am Jasmine Hale. I'm a principal and I oversee the firm's corporate counsel team. Sometimes people will refer to us as the general counsel. So today we are going to go through a board trainings. We're going to call this board training light. There's definitely a lot more information that's available and relevant for board meetings and service. But we want to try and keep this a tight presentation at an hour to respect your time. So thank you so much for being here. And, it's helpful to know Jill is a brand new board member.
Button for punishment, like you guys all out there.
So she went and bought her condo and Lordy help her. She is now on the board side. So I thought it would be a very helpful presentation to be like, so Jill, let's start this presentation. And we will try to get through as many questions as we can, time permitting. So again, thank you so much for being here. So now we shall start. So Jill, you are a brand new board member. And what do you know about the topic or the term fiduciary duty?
Well, if you would have asked me before I signed up or volunteered to be a board member, I would have said, oh, I totally understand what that means. But now that you asked me in the context of actually having to do it, I kind of clench up and go, what I think it means is that I'm acting on behalf of the association instead of my own interests.
Very well stated. And yes, that's an element. I always ask this question at the beginning of a board training because the most important thing that a board needs to understand is what is your fiduciary duty so that you can meet it. And, a lot of board members will say, is, oh, we have to be like financial stewards. And yes, that's an element. But the underpinnings of fiduciary duty, there's a duty of care on one hand and a duty of loyalty on the other hand. And the duty of care is a obligation that the board has to engage in reasonable due diligence. And the standard is, reasonable due diligence that a board member in a similar shoes or similar situation would do. And so, the first question that I get asked is, how do I know if I did that?
Yeah.
You're like, Jasmine, if you're telling me this is like, a football field, we can't crap out on the 1 yard line. There's no points. We need to get into the end zone. Think of fiduciary duty as that concept. You have to get into the end zone in order to have the protection that is afforded to directors who volunteer for their associations. So you're like, all right, well, how do I get into that end zone? And that's really what board members, want to understand. And so the first thing that board members need to do in their, reasonable due diligence is ask questions.
To who? Who would I ask those questions? My manager?
Good question.
My attorney?
All of the above.
Am I going to get charged for us? I can come ask you and it's not.
Probably. But yeah, the law does not have a thou shalt, this is the minimum way that you fiduciary. Rather, it's what's reasonable given the circumstance. And so it could be a fairly easy question, hey, AB 130 is this new law that came out this, summer, not on anyone's bingo card. And your manager could say, hey, we have this new law that came out. Here's this, a packet of information we received from an attorney. And the board could say, okay, that's sufficient. It could be that you've got you're in a condo building, you're on the bottom floor.
I am.
I will generally give condo examples because they're easy and kind of easy to understand, but you could be a board member in a condo project and the bottom floor unit reports a plumbing issue.
This happened yesterday with the rains and it was out on my patio and it was, the drain was backing up. Anyway,
No, it's good.
it receded, but this is a good
This is a
example.
very good example. So did you inform your HOA?
Yeah, well, I informed our manager,
Okay,
I
very
said, I'll take care of it. And then he asked me today, I said, it seems to be receding and so far it seems to have been receded, so.
Okay. So now do you do anything else with that? Because you're not just Jill the homeowner,
Oh.
you're now also Jill
Well.
the board member.
Let me clarify because, and let's explore this a little bit, because today, as of today, I am Jill the homeowner. As of next month, I think when it gets ratified, I will be Jill the board member.
Okay.
So right now I'm acting as a homeowner with probably the
Board aspirations.
nervousness of what I've committed myself to. But what would I have done differently other than tell the manager, had I already been ratified as the board
Sure.
member?
So it could be that, you know, you send an email to the rest of the board and say, hey, there was a, clog in my thing. I let our manager know. Maybe we should have some sort of said there's a drain on your patio.
Mhm.
Maybe we need to have, the drain snaked. I don't know if you can snake patio drains, but you wouldn't ask your attorney. What you would do
Right.
is say, what's reasonable in that circumstance is tell your management, inform the board, and then have a discussion. Hey, I mean, it wasn't like a biblical rainstorm yesterday, it was just kind of standard. And we've gone through biblical ones where you're like, oh,
Right,
where to
right.
be? So it could be that you say, hey, do we need to snake the drain? Can you even snake drains in patios?
Well, let me ask this, as a board member, how much responsibility do I have to understand exactly the limitations of what is the association's responsibility versus what isn't the association's responsibility? Like maybe certain drains are not the association's responsibility to snake and clear them up.
I love this. Fan up to my ears. Well, you would want to read your governing document.
Oh, I have to read the whole thing?
They're so scintillating. So yeah, you would want to read your governing documents, and let's say you read it and you're like, well, geez, Jasmine, they were clear as mud.
Yeah.
Which a lot of boards are stuck with very opaque documents that are not easy to understand. Sometimes they can have conflicting provisions or they could be silent on things. And so, let's say you read your documents and you're like, well, I'm not exactly sure who's responsible for my patio drain.
Yeah.
Didn't really call it out in at least language that me, like a normal person,
Mhm.
could understand. Then your manager may say, hey, board, we need to go to legal counsel so they can give us an opinion on who's the responsible party for patio drains. Like, okay, that's doing the due diligence. It's asking the questions like, hey, manager, should we snake the drain?
Mhm.
And your manager may come back and be like, yes, thanks for letting us know. We're gonna get a, plumbing service called out, or, hey, that's a homeowner responsibility. And, if you, the homeowner, read through the document, like, I didn't see anything in there that
Yeah.
like called attention. It's to ask questions. I generally say an easy way to, sort of feel internally confident that you are asking reasonable questions and engaging in reasonable due diligence is going back to like what my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Van Hooser, told us: who, what, where, when, why, how. Ask those types of open-ended questions, so it's not just, I had a plumbing leak and my patio drain seemed to be clogged. It could be, hey, management, the patio drain clogged. Is there any kind of vendor that we should call to look into this? Hey, what kinds of things can be done when the plumbing vendor comes? It's not just, oh yeah, we had them snake the line, right? Because you're like, well, a plumbing vendor may be only inclined to do the work that you've asked,
Yeah.
unless you ask questions to say, hey, thanks so much for snaking the line. Is there anything else you would recommend that we should look into now? And they may say, oh yeah, you put a camera down, your drain is clogged with, 3 feet of roots.
Most of us don't wanna do that. Is it like fiduciary to have to try to ask those things? I mean, I take my car in for an oil change and I'm saying, don't look at anything else. Don't come at me with $1,000.
Do not change those filters, they're fine.
Yeah.
I have not died of smoke inhalation yet, it's
Yeah,
okay. I mean, the responsibility is to ask the questions. And so, I was when I had my condo, I was on my condo board, and I remember, we had a subterranean parking garage. And, if you've ever gone to a subterranean parking garage, you can normally see there's like, water pipes
Yeah.
and whatnot on
Yeah.
the ceiling. And there were lots of like drip pans that were
Oh, yeah.
installed at like the, sort of elbow
joints.
joints. And I don't know anything about plumbing. I thought that was just normal because the pans were there when I moved in. And so I joined the board. And, you know, throughout my term as a board member, I learned, oh, it's not normal to have, you know, drip pans under joints that suggest pipes are leaking. And, you know, my own board, our our treasurer at the time, he was trying to do the right thing in terms of being a steward of the association's reserves. But we were like, hey, we should get a contractor to look into this because we probably shouldn't have drip pans everywhere in our garage. And his response was, we don't want to ask the question because we could be liable. He's like, I already know what they're going to come back and tell us. It's a $2 million reef pipe job. And at the time I was like, yeah, we're going to hide under the table and not ask that question. And this was before I was an HOA attorney. And, you know, since then, part of what I've learned about fiduciary duty is that you are safer and more protected as a board and as an association for asking the hard questions and saying, what do we, you know, need to know here? It's a $2 million repipe job. Well, we don't have $2 million, but now we know this information. We can start saving money, putting money aside. Hey, contractor, you just told me we need to repipe the building.
Yeah.
That's expensive and crazy. Is there anything short of repipes that could be done on a temporary basis? And so that's the type of reasonable due diligence and investigation that board members need to engage in. And I always like to tell this is something your managers will like clap for me saying, you know, part of that due diligence for board members, it's incumbent on you to actually show up to board meetings prepared. And, you know, your managers put together, they're typically, you know, if you were to print them out, you know, like 3-inch thick stacks of paper with hundreds and hundreds of pages of financials and contracts and proposals and member communications and like everything that the board is going to come across. They put into a packet that's assembled with care, you know, they're pretty laborious, and management doesn't do that just to like shove a bunch of paper at their board members. It's so the board members have all of the information at hand so you can make informed choices. So
I was gonna say, maybe they are, if you've been mean to them. Yeah, I wanted to say also, guys, I'm seeing questions and hands rising during this. Keep putting your questions in the Q&A and we'll try our best to get to them at the end. I'm not skilled enough to keep watching questions and pay attention.
there you go. So just know we will come back to the
see that you're
Q&A.
asking them.
So, you know, that's just one thing that I like to make sure board members hear. I'm on Community Associations Institute Board of Directors, so I get that, you know, 200-page thick, you know, packet of information. And, you know, we all have intense day-to-day lives, family commitments, work, etc. And so I know on the days when I have my CAI board meeting, I wake up at like 5 a.m. and that's aggressively early for me. I know other people are like, wow, that's sleeping in. And Jill's like, don't even come at me with 5. And, you know, but I carve out the time to go through the packet to read it, even though it's like the last thing I want to do on a Thursday morning is wake up at 5 and like read financials. But that's my commitment when I said I want to be a board member, that I, you know, also have to actively perform my duties as a board member. So that's duty of care.
Okay.
Duty of loyalty, in some ways, it's the easier one for board members to understand, and in some ways it's harder. So a duty of loyalty is, you know, what Jill explained, a responsibility to act in the association's best interest, even above your own personal self-interests. And so how that can be evidenced is, you know, avoiding conflicts of interest. The Davis-Sterling Act and the Corporations Code, those are the 2 primary bodies of law that govern HOAs in California and boards of directors under service. They care about financial conflicts of interest, that they're disclosed. So as an example, let's say you didn't work at Birding and Weil, and you instead worked at Bear Paint, and you were in their accounting department. And, you know, unbeknownst to you, your manager went and it's time to repaint your building. And one of the contracts in the, you know, list of 3 proposals, that's a best practice, is Bear pain.
Yeah.
You know, when the board reviews that at the meeting, you would be like, oh, hey, I need to disclose, like, I work
Yeah.
at Bear, I don't have like a direct financial interest in this, like, I'm not getting a payout.
Right.
But I am disclosing that I work for them, I do have a financial interest,
Yeah.
and, you know, best practice would be to actually recuse yourself from the discussion. The law does not actually require that for the financial ones, that's the corporation's code. Davis Sterling absolutely does require that board members don't vote on your own architectural applications and things that a board member has, you know, like submitted. So let's say you made a complaint against your neighbor. You wouldn't get to vote on the disciplinary
Yeah.
action, and that makes total sense, right? Well, that would be a conflict of
Yeah.
interest. So that's some of the easy ways to like think of conflict of interest. The harder ways are, I'll give you an example. This is a director, and I won't use the name of the director and I won't use the name of the HOA, but if we can remember a couple years ago, it's when inflation was like super crazy. And an HOA got a report, because they'd had some leaks and they had lots of buildings in their HOA that the HOA was responsible for the roofs of the residences. And so let's just say that there was 50, you know, little building clumps throughout the HOA. And they get this report from their roofing consultant that they hired because they did the right thing and investigated, why are we having leaks? Because they still had, you know, what they believed was another 10 years or more of useful life left on their roofs. And the consultant came back and said, well, the roofs, sure you do have 10 more years, but the underlayment, that's that waterproofing layer underneath the roof, that's shot. There is no more waterproofing. And it failed a decade early. And so the association was short by about half of the money that they needed in the reserves to be able to pay for it. And
Hold on, did the board first, was their first duty to check if there was any warranty left on this, the lifespan of this roof?
good question, yes, and there wasn't. You know, sometimes record keeping is not what we would like for it to be, so that was not option, but a great question to ask. Who can we make responsible for this that's not us? A super good question. And so, you know, the board realized, I can't say that Jill's unit is gonna leak this year or Jasmine's, but I know that someone's unit is gonna leak. And in California, it's a negligence state. So if a party who has a duty to do something knows that they need to do something and they fail to do it, that's negligence. So, you know, the association realized we can't not fix these roofs, but we're gonna have to levy emergency assessment of $15,000 per person. And, you know, this was on the end of, you know, COVID and with the inflation, and the board president like looked at me in this in this board meeting where, I mean, it was real sobering. And it is never fun to sit with a board where they realize like, that's, you know, for most normal people, like that can be life-changing kind of amount of money.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if your HOA came to you and was like, oh, we need 50,000 in a month? You'd be
Yeah.
like, oh, let me just.
I'd be coming into work saying I need a raise.
So, you know, but, and the board president at the time, he looked at me and was like, I don't actually know how I'm gonna come up with this money. And I don't have it, but I still have to vote in favor of this emergency assessment. That's what, that duty of loyalty, that fidelity to the association's best interest, even ahead of your own best interest, is what duty of loyalty is. And that's why I say it can sometimes be the harder one for people to wrap their arms around, because they're like, oh, hell no. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
that's tough.
That
That's
is
tough. But that is the level of fidelity that a director does owe their corporation. And some other parts of the, you know, duty of loyalty are, you know, things like protecting the association's confidential information, because it's not each director's confidential information, it's the corporation's confidential information. And, you know, I know that sometimes people will say, well, you know, I'm the truth teller here. I'm the, you know, whistleblower that's really holding everyone to account. And I say that might be the laudable objective, but it does not take away from the fact that it was never the director's information on his or her own to share. That's a board vote that needs to happen if the board wants to disclose confidential information. And sometimes that can be surprising to directors where they're like, I did not realize I was breaching my fiduciary duty by sharing confidential information that wasn't authorized to be shared. And so why I spend all this time on fiduciary duty is so that you can know how to get into the end zone, but why it matters so much is that in the state of California, the courts have this doctrine of judicial deference. And what that means is if you can meet the business judgment rule, so that's what I've just covered, you engaged in reasonable due diligence, you acted in good faith in the best interest of your association ahead of your own, like a normal person in your shoes would have done. If you can demonstrate that you've done that, the courts do not second guess board decisions. You are the presumed experts in your HOA. And even if the decision went sideways and the court's like, yeah, I wouldn't have done that one, they still don't overturn the decisions of the board because they say you did your reasonable due diligence, you acted in the best interest. Maybe that outcome happens, but nonetheless, we're not going to overturn your decision.
And then I'm protected by the DNO coverage, right? So someone, even if they try to come after me personally, I'm still covered because it's been proven that I acted in good faith.
Correct. And in California, most DNO policies will have a duty to defend. And I always like to tell that at this point, because sometimes board members are like increasingly like white cheeked at this point, and they're like, I am like slowly walking backwards to like, maybe I don't want to be in this.
Right.
And I say, look, as a matter of high public policy, you have the corporations code, you have the civil code, both of those protect volunteer homeowner directors from personal liability exposure. But the sort of quid pro quo is, well, we have to be able to demonstrate that we acted in good faith and in the best interest. And another part that isn't, directly in the civil code or corporations code is you have to be acting as a board. A unilateral director action is not necessarily going to be protected. And you need to be acting within the scope of your authority. So I always tell board members, if you're out there on an island all by yourself, don't do that.
Well, hold on now. What if I'm trying to say we need to ask the questions about the plumbing, and then the other board members, if there's a discrepancy between what should we do? Am I still protected even though I wanted to ask those second layer questions, but the board ultimately decides, no, we're just gonna ignore this?
Well, that's a good question, and it's one that comes up because there can be differences of opinion.
Yeah.
And, it's gonna come down to what was reasonable.
Okay.
And, I've had boards that have really, kind of been fractured over the level of analysis and the level of investigation. And sometimes you can have some directors that want more information and more extensive, due diligence in order to answer the question. And then there can be others that are like, we're happy with the level of information that we've received. I will say that reliance on experts is one of the things that the corporations code specifically calls out as being something board members are encouraged to rely on. So it could be that we've got this plumbing issue at Jill's building, and Jill understandably is like, I want to know everything because I don't want my beautiful brand new floor. It's really spectacular, to, be ruined. And you can have the board members who are like, we're okay with the amount of information that the plumbing contractors told us. They said they have to snake the drain and they're going to do ABC fix. And, you could be like, I still want more, like, I'm just not comfortable. And, the board in that situation could say, well, we asked these open-ended questions of our plumbing contractor, and here's the information that they recommended. Now, the flip side of that is, let's say we've still got your building, the plumbing issue, and the board says, well, the drain receded on its own, it's fixed. And you're like, fairly positive we should like have a plumbing contractor come out. And let's say the plumbing contractor does come out and they're like, well, yeah, you need to do A, B, and C, and the board's like, that'll be in next year, 2026. You know, that could expose the board to liability because A, they've now been informed, you know, A, B, C are the things we need to do. So it really is a iterative process where you ask questions of the appropriate subject matter experts. You know, if you ask me like, what can we do to fix my, you know, patio drain, I would be, you need to call the plumber.
Yeah,
And, you know, it could be that I'd be the correct person when there is a dispute. Is this a homeowner or a association responsibility? So that's why the business judgment rule is such an important tool to be able to use if you're a board member, is to say, I'm protected. Like, I feel comfortable even when you have homeowners that are like, I'm coming at you. And it happens regrettably often
yeah,
that you can like satisfy your own conscience and say, I know we've asked the right questions, we followed the guidance of our subject matter experts, and maybe your homeowners are not gonna like the answers, but if you followed the right process, you are, as board members, protected from liability exposure, and that's important to know.
yeah.
So now we're gonna cover just sort of board structure and an oversight. And it sounds simple, but board members are elected or appointed to terms. And officers are selected by the board members to fulfill roles. And what that means is like the president doesn't vote on anything, the board members vote. And sometimes it could just be semantics, but I always like to make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of board members vote, officers serve roles. So if you're the president, you're the person who chairs the meetings. You're typically going to be the primary point of contact with management. You may help to, you know, sort of finalize the agendas. It's important for boards to understand all board members have the ability to put an agenda item on your agenda. Now, it may be that you keep asking for the same things and the board president's like, well, we're just gonna put that at the bottom because we've already asked and answered the question. We're not interested in new pool furniture. You're like, stop coming at me, Jasmine. I feel attacked. You know, same thing with like the secretary of the board. The secretary signs the minutes when the board approves them. And I routinely get this question, but what if I wasn't at the meeting? Doesn't matter. If you're in the secretary's seat, even if you were at the meeting and you disagreed with the minutes, you sign the minutes. And then every once in a while, I'll get a question, well, our secretary won't do that. And I'm like, well, we should have a consideration. Maybe we need a new secretary. And they're like, that's not gonna happen. I'm like, then have the president sign.
What do you mean disagreed with the minutes?
No.
That might be one where we need a separate.
That can be a very loaded question. There can definitely be boards that, and I deal with them weekly, so there's, you know, a number of them. I mean, in the state of California, it may surprise you to hear, there's over 55,000 HOAs. That's a lot of HOAs. So we're counsel to many of those HOAs. So in that large 55,000 clump, there's definitely boards that are in very strong disagreement with each other for reasons big and small. And sometimes they don't even agree on the facts of what happened at a meeting.
Okay.
You know, that's not what we agreed to. Gotcha. Yes, that's what we agreed to. Let me read and so. Yeah.
Could you put in the minutes that this was discussed, it wasn't agreed upon? Could that go in the minutes?
Sure. Yeah. And like I actually do a whole like training with boards and management in particular on things like minutes and what should go in minutes, what shouldn't go in minutes. So it's definitely important to know that information. Okay. So, you know, one thing that I like to talk about with boards is just sort of director actions and conduct, because as directors, you're not only like the fiduciaries of the corporation, but your actions, whether intended or not, can have liability exposure to your corporations. And so you could be a board member who's like, I'm just walking Milo and Mitzi in the park by my house. I wasn't at a board meeting, I was in sweats, like just trying to walk the dogs. And, you know, I come across another resident in the building and, you know, we have some sort of like, you know, altercation spat. That can involve the association, even though you're like, it shouldn't, but 100% of the time, let me tell you, the HOA often gets swept into liability simply because the person who's like involved in an issue or an incident is a board member.
What if I'm out walking them and another resident or another owner asks me, hey, Jill, what are we doing about that pavement in front of the building? And let's say I answer of whatever I think is happening about.
So this is a very good question. Like my response would be, hey, please check with management, assuming most associations are managed, whether you're self-managed or you have a, you know, third-party property management company. But I would generally refer the person back to management, and it's not an attempt to be evasive, say, hey, you know, I'm gonna give you the information that I recall, but really like circle back with management. They're gonna have the most up-to-date correct information. I don't wanna steer you the wrong way, because it could be, you're like, oh, I remembered what we talked about in August.
Yeah.
And you're like, sometimes there's no judgment. Sometimes we black out time. We just do.
Yeah.
And you're like, you know, I totally spaced out the September board meeting where we
Right.
talked about ABC.
Right.
So that's why it's a good habit for board members, even if it's instinctive to want, you're serving your community. Like, I totally understand that your instinct is, I'm gonna answer the question. It's just the liability that comes with it. Same scenario. I'm a homeowner. I see you in the park. My little Mitzi, so cute. She really does have adorable dogs. They're little French bulldogs with the cute ears. And, you know, we pet the dogs and I'm like, oh, hey, I had my patio drain got all like clogged last night. What about yours? And it's like, yeah, this thing happened. And you have this like little exchange and then think nothing of it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, in November, we get another rainstorm and this time it like floods my house. And I say, well, I told Jill.
Yeah.
You're like, thank
Yeah,
God.
I didn't think about it, right? And I might not, that's real.
And that's like a totally realistic scenario. And you're like, hey, I wasn't like a board member Jill when I ran into them at the park. I was just talking to a neighbor that I'm like sort of friendly with.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to not like report it to the board, but I was in the middle of a, you know, 5-mile walk with the dogs. And so, you know, that's why I always just like to really call attention that like board members intentionally or unintentionally, and it's unintentional most of the time, simply because of your role, can create liability to the corporation. And so one of the easiest ways to help lower that liability is have that standard, you know, hey, definitely report this to management. You know, like, you know, and then have your conversation. Yeah, my drain too. But that way you've got a standard protocol for how information needs to be communicated to your association and, you know, how the board's responses to just regular, like, I also want to be a human. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And another couple things are, you know, the way that your homeowners see boards interact, it matters. And you don't have to like each other. And you don't have to like wanna, you know, grab a beer after the board meeting together. You can definitely have like, I do not want to share beers with them at the end of my board meetings. And that's okay. But board members really should focus on respectful and professional interactions, especially with your vendors, with management, with each other, and always at board meetings. And the reason why is that if your homeowners see you acting like feral cats to each other, they're gonna act that way to you. It's just human nature. I've seen it happen way too many times for it not to be like called attention to. So for your own sakes, you know, engage respectfully. It's okay to say respectfully, I disagree with your position. And then allow that to be the end of it. If you have disagreements on policy, instead of it being, I think you're an idiot because you know, support ABC, it could say, you know, I support policy ABC for these reasons. And making it, instead of people-based, you know, it's item-based, policy-based, you'll really help to lower the level of disagreement and sort of acrimony that comes. You know, I've got a client right now, I won't name who they are, and they're in the middle of a very acrimonious public infrastructure project. And so they've had a utility company that has said they need to do you know, potentially substantial upgrade to some of the like utility infrastructure in and around the community. And there are some people who are very pro, let's have this done. And there are other people who are very, we don't want this occurring, you know, in and around our homes. And it's created a lot of acrimony among the board. And I think part of the community's absorption of how they've seen the board members interact with each other has definitely not helped make the matter better in the community. I think it's helped make matters worse. So it can be really hard, and I understand that. Because, you know, in a utility infrastructure, like, I would be like, I did not know that that could, you know, result in such passions. And then you take a step back and you're like, well, there's people who have safety concerns and they're trying to protect the community and their families. There's other people who say, hey, we need to make sure that we have enough, you know, water and power and electricity to, you know, safely operate and live comfortably in our homes and communities. And, you know, I'm not here to say these people are right, these people are wrong. You know, so it's like, how do we have a civil discussion over something that two sides adamantly are for or against? And, you know, just know that finding a way to have a respectful dialogue can really go a long way, not just in helping the community through challenging issues. You know, board members come across tough issues. It's not always going to be, you know, do we redo the pool furniture?
Seems to me the best way to have that interaction would be on the website next door.
Oh, Lordy be, oh heavens. I, you know, very candidly and truthfully recommend boards just not be on it. Because I've seen the interactions, and Nextdoor I'm using as a shorthand for kind of like all social media. You know, if it's community based,
Yeah,
you know, and it just, I've seen it go off the rails, you know, more times than it's a productive vehicle for information sharing. I wish that I didn't have that as a response, because, you know, to me, the more ways that you could help facilitate knowledge and information, the better. And yet it just
Also,
generally doesn't go well.
On that, should we be exchanging emails, the board members, about stuff, about board topics?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, we had a case from 2 years ago now. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have been like, no, just don't email each other. The law defines board meeting as any time a majority of board members here discuss or deliberate an item within the board's scope of authority. You're like, well, that's fairly broad. And so, you know, attorneys like myself had long understood that to be, well, board members should not have email between meetings.
Yeah.
And, you know, the holding of that case said, well, email discussion is okay, but email decisions are not. And let me ask you, where's the line? When does
Yeah.
something go from being decided to discussed?
Yeah, like, right, oh, we should snake that drain. Oh, good idea, we should. Is that decided?
It might just be, I mean, so that's why, like, the answer to the question is,
Yeah.
I really, really recommend a, you know, cautious discretion in terms of you know, engaging in email. The discussion is really intended to happen at the notice board meetings.
Although, I mean, some of these decisions need to be made faster, you know, if there is like a leak or something like.
You can always have emergency board meetings, so there is that.
Okay.
So we're now gonna move to a fair housing topic, and I mean, if you were to ask me 10 years ago, we definitely would never have covered this topic. And I've started including it in all the board trainings that I do, mostly so that boards are aware that you are subject to fair housing laws, state and federal fair housing laws. And, they're like, you mean like reasonable accommodations and stuff? I'm like, absolutely, yes. Harassment, legal, reasonable accommodations, protected class discrimination, all of those things apply in HOAs. And no, you're typically not subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act, but there are other fair housing statutes that exist. And so I just like for board members to have heard, because it's probably not a question of if you're ever going to have to deal with a fair housing claim, it's a when. And I hate that that's the case, but the ease at which a person, and I'm not talking about just a homeowner, it could be a tenant. Hell, it could be a relative of a tenant who comes and visits the HOA a lot. And they could file a fair housing claim against you and, with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And you're like, now you're in the federal system. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like, burr. And so just know that fair housing laws do apply. They can be absurdly expensive in terms of the civil penalties. It is something that board members really should engage with legal counsel as soon as the issues arise, instead of like, well, we're gonna try and handle this ourselves. And you're like,
Give me some examples of what I would be looking for that would fall under this.
I'll give a great example. We had a tenant at a client, so this is a renter, not even a homeowner. And the tenant asked the association for reasonable accommodation. And the association's first response is, we don't deal with tenants. You have to ask your landlord.
Well, what kind of accommodation, like a new parking spot or?
That would have been nice. She asked for the association to bring up the packages from the mailroom to her unit.
All right.
And, the association isn't a package delivery company, and they're like, that, we don't have board members that just do package delivery, that's outside the scope of our responsibility. And so she's asking for $250,000.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not trying to encourage anyone to pursue fair housing claims, but yeah.
And so was it immediately tendered to the association's insurance?
Well, again, we are all I'm ethically required to at least, announce to boards of directors, hey, this is something that you should consider tendering to your insurance carrier. And there's good reasons why boards sometimes say, thank you for letting us know. We hear the recommendation, but our carrier told us if we file any more claims, we're gonna get dropped.
Yeah.
So Jasmine, you're tagged.
Yeah.
I'm like, okey-dokey. So it's really just for board members to know fair housing has, over the last 10 years especially, become an increasingly active part of our practice. And a lot of times it's, the board members' first time hearing and understanding that fair housing laws even apply. And I mean, it's so crazy that I tell you, it could not involve the board's conduct whatsoever. You could have neighbor A who says neighbor B has made some, racial slurs and makes them uncomfortable, so they don't go to the gym anymore, the community gym. And you could just be like, hey, we saw each other at the mail kiosk and I was getting my bills, but you're now the board member and you learned this information. The HOA has this affirmative responsibility to investigate that claim. And, and then to take action if it's within your scope of authority. And people will be like, well, I can't make someone not be a racist. And I understand that, but you could say, we're a zero tolerance community and we don't condone, discrimination or any type of, negative actions towards members of protected classes. It could be that the slur never happened and they were just they had beef with this person, went on a bad date. I mean, I've literally seen it all. So it's just to know that it's a liability that's out there, so that it's not the first time you're hearing it. If a claim is filed, you're like, what the heck? And so the last thing that we're gonna cover very quickly, and then I'll be able to get through hopefully everybody's questions, is owner discipline and enforcement. The very most favorite thing, all of you join your board so that you can narc on your neighbors. No, I promise you. It's one of the more difficult parts of being a board member. On one hand, you can have communities that, you know, are like up your ass about fix this, fix this, fix this. And then there can be others where, you know, the board is really trying and they're like, hey, we've done, you know, hearings and fines and everything, but this issue still hasn't been resolved. And so, you know, the main thing for boards to understand about owner discipline is that you do have an affirmative duty to enforce your documents. But how you go about enforcing your documents is a business decision. So then we go back to the first thing that I talked about where you're like, oh, so we have to like ask questions and we have to do investigation. And yes, you know, one of the most important things for boards to keep in mind with respect to enforcement is you want consistency and you want sort of uniformity. I mean, imagine if all of us have to take our trash cans out and you're like, all right, I'm not exactly the best at getting the trash cans back in. That is actually my husband's job. And so I see that, you know, everybody, we get our trash cans back in a day late. Maybe my block had a big party and we were all just slow to the draw. But I'm the only one on my cul-de-sac who gets a fine letter. You know, and I asked my neighbor, hey, John, like, did you get a fine letter for the trash cans? And he's like, no. I might look at my HOA and say, why are you picking on me? Is it because I have dyed red hair? Is it because I'm a woman?
Because you do it all the time.
It's very likely. They're like, John has never done this before, Jasmine. Yours is a monthly situation. Get on that. And that might be the case.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a liability for associations when members perceive they've been treated differently.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna see the thing I just talked about, fair housing claims. And so it's that easy to create a fair housing claim from an enforcement measure. And so that's one of the ways you can help lower liability is by consistent enforcement. Is sometimes consistency isn't warranted. And you say, well, yeah, we allowed architectural improvement A and B and C, but we didn't allow the same improvement for D, not because of any type of protected reason, protected class person, but because they have the entry lot to the community. And we didn't want them to have a, you know, 6-foot garden gnome in the front yard. And so, you know, when board members are gonna engage in enforcement in a different way than they may have previously, you know, they're well served really documenting the minutes, documenting, you know, response to the owner that articulates, here's these business reasons why this is being handled differently. And it won't necessarily eliminate the risk, but it can definitely help to mitigate it. And that's one of the things that board members need to focus on in your, you know, operation of your community association. And the last thing with owner discipline is, you know, your responsibility is to engage in reasonable due diligence. Let's say that Jill reports a complaint, says, yeah, my next door neighbor, really loud, terrible, and the board investigates. And they're like, yeah, we agree, loud, not good. You know, what happens with a lot of associations is the homeowner's like, well, when are you filing the lawsuit? And the board's like, oh, no, we're not gonna file the lawsuit. That's a you thing, not a us thing. And I love for boards to hear that the means of enforcement is your choice. And, you know, as long as you've got your, you know, business judgment, we've done our reasonable due diligence, we sought all the expert opinions, we've, you know, either treated everybody consistently, or there's all these good faith business reasons for why this one's being handled differently. You know, after you've got your, you know, neighbor to neighbor noise complaint, whether you've made a finding that there is, you know, unreasonable noise violation occurring or not, it's okay to say, hey, the board has done its level of enforcement here. We don't believe that it's the best use of the HOA's money as a whole to pursue further legal action. Dear homeowner, you are legally entitled, Civil Code 5975, to pursue the same legal action you're asking the HOA to do. You can do that. And I think that's helpful for board members to hear, because I know that a lot of times you're put in these challenging situations where it's really an owner to owner dispute, but it does involve conduct that may or does violate, the governing documents. The answer is we did our due diligence, we had our investigation, we've made the findings we've made, and we're electing not to move forward. So that is the thing. We're now going to cover some.
I think someone is asking the first one, why does their management company change out our building manager without consultation or explanation? I don't know if you can answer that in board training.
Well, I mean, I would definitely inquire with the management company. I mean, it could be that the the community manager who was assigned has moved on to another opportunity or a different role in the company. And the management company has an obligation to provide services, unless there's, a provision in your agreement that says management company is not only providing services, but person X is that person. But I've read lots and lots of management companies, like hundreds over the years, and it would be very rare that it's necessarily person specific, not never, but I would, have a conversation with your management company. And it's one thing that, boards come to me not infrequently and say, we're not happy with management. Whether it's they changed our manager without telling us and we feel disregarded in that process, that's an absolutely, reasonable response to have. You'd be like, hey, we knew person X, we liked person X, you took them away from us, you didn't even give us the courtesy of this is happening. They
probably didn't even know
sometimes they may not have known, sometimes they're employers and they're not able to share, private personnel related issues. So there could be reasons, but before we let, well, now we don't trust them, have the conversation with management and say, hey, we interpreted X in this way. We don't want this to, sully our management relationship moving forward. Can you share why this happened? And I would at least ask the question for sure.
Our next question has to do with AB 130, this newly passed law restricting fines to a maximum of $100 outside of health and safety. They're asking for a board member, but they're saying, is there anything that HOA board members can do to support or this new legislation and to address this? And I wanted to say real quick before Jasmine issues an answer, I kind of cut out a whole bunch of detail in the middle, but we did a whole webinar on AB 130 like a month ago, or when it was newly passed, and you can find that on our YouTube channel. You can find it if you go back on our social media. You can also email me and I'll send you a direct link to it. I will be emailing all the attendees after this with a couple of things. So I don't know how much you want to answer about that. I'm going to say, give your board member our webinar.
I'll answer very quickly. When I am a delegate on the Community Associations Institute Legislative Action Committee. It's kind of a mouthful. It's called CLAC. And so CLAC is we're the lobbying nerds of the HOA, like the super nerds. And so this is absolutely something that CLAC is, has extensively talked about. I have full confidence it will be the top of our legislative priority for 2026. It's a garbage statute. Sorry, I wish that I had better things to say about it. I don't want to get whacked. But it really is an ill-conceived law. I mean, so I won't go on about that. But one thing that, homeowners and board members can do is sign up on caiclac.com for, getting information in terms of legislative bills to be tracking, ways that you can support. One thing that we always do when we have these types of, laws that come up is we may have a campaign You know, say, hey, write your legislator and tell them, we think this is a garbage statute. And the more people that participate, the more meaningful it becomes. Imagine if you were the governor and yeah, the legislature went and approved law X. And then in between when the law gets approved and the governor has the ability to veto it or allow it to come into law, you get 3,000 letters from unhinged homeowners and board members like, WTF, this is crazy, this is a crap piece of legislation. That actually matters. And the more people that we have who are aware that they can participate like that and do, it does make a meaningful difference. We have had success in getting electronic voting. That's one of the things that we did to help get that across the finish line, was have a really effective, campaign like support this legislation. It can also be meaningful when we're trying to, dump trash legislation.
Okay, do we have a generic list of health and safety violations, again, in regard to AB 130, so that they can figure out?
Well, the quick answer to that is there isn't a generic list because the board is obligated under the statute to make findings about the health and safety issues for your community. So there may be a lot of similarities in terms of health safety violations that you're like, hey, allowing a dog to roam off leash in a community, it's unsafe. That may be one that most communities would say, okay, well, that could be on our list, but the law actively requires that the board at a meeting make findings on these health safety issues.
Yeah. All right, so if the board is finding financial errors and they have to go back to their management company to get them corrected. I mean, this is a tricky one to ask. Is there any chance of getting more of the details right the first time around? It's hard for us to speak against or about, like, negatively about our other industry professionals. So maybe for these kind of questions, and I don't want to name, I don't know how much you guys can see about who's asking this, but maybe just reach out to us directly.
Yeah, well, but I will say that, so HOA accounting is not as easy as one may think. And you're like, wow, how hard can it be to get this thing coded correctly? And you say, all right, you have all these GL codes. And this was an irrigation invoice. And so I am the association's accounting department and I book it under landscaping. And you're like, no, that's not supposed to be landscaping. That should be, booked under some other GL code. I wish that the association, like that everything could be perfect the first time out, but that's part of why the board has to meet and why the association, like each director is required to review the financials every month. It's because there's a lot of back and forth that's involved in operating a common interest community. And it's not necessarily always because management got something wrong. It could be that there was more context than what the manager who oversees your account knows versus the accounting team that may or may not even be in the same state. It might not be like, oh, just walk down the hallway to, Sarah's office and be like, hey, that's a thing. And so it's something that it doesn't necessarily mean management has screwed up. It means the board needs to share information. And so, like Jill said, that's a question that sort of has a presumption that I'm not necessarily gonna actually agree with, but if it's something that happens routinely, it could be good to sit down with management and talk through what is the accounting process. How can we try and, correct these issues from happening, and have a dialogue. And if you hear me say it once, you're gonna hear me say it a dozen times, like having a dialogue with management when you feel frustrated is a helpful thing. Having a respectful dialogue is imperative, because what you don't want to do is come at them the way you would want to be come at. And so I'm a huge proponent of having conversations and allowing people to feel heard. And it could be the board does not you know, like they haven't had the conversation. So I would recommend the conversation before we read into why is it happening, and then we can go from there.
We have one here. Is it typical for the HOA to cover pipes in the walls? Do governing docs usually cover the pipes in the walls?
It's
Association.
gonna be 1000% specific to each community association. So I can't really give an answer. I can tell you Civil Code 4775 says, you know, in a planned well, no, it doesn't say in a planned development. There's a default level of maintenance, repair, and replacement. Says if your CCNRs don't say differently, then HOA repairs, replaces, common area. Homeowners replace and repair unit or separate interest. And for exclusive use common area, you split the baby. And it's HOA repair and replace, homeowner maintained. And so you like, that's why I'm like, ooh, I can't answer that question.
That clarified it.
Okay, well, now it's just right there.
I think this is a good one. If you do have to have a HELOC or a loan to cover assessments, and then your dues go up, and now it's gonna shy prospective buyers away because the dues are higher. I don't actually see the question in there, except to say that's a reality.
Sure. I mean, obviously, assessments is community specific, but it's also sort of area specific. So, you know, if you're a 80-unit community in Concord, you know, that you're an 80-unit condo building in Concord, you're gonna be evaluated, are your dues in line? Are they relatively consistent with other, you know, similarly sized projects in and around Concord? You wouldn't be evaluated, are we, you know, in line with a, you know, 80-unit property in San Francisco?
And actually, I take it back. I see the question. They were asking if we have lenders that we can refer you to. Yes, we do. So
there you go.
This one says, hi, Jasmine, if 3 board members work for the same company, 2 of which would be the boss of the 2 board members, is that considered a conflict of interest? One of which who would be the boss of the other 2 board members, is that a conflict of interest?
No, I mean, it could be, there could be a lot of reasons, like maybe you're a new community. And it's still, you know, the developer is in process of selling the units, and the developer is entitled as a matter of law and, you know, bylaws to appoint the representatives to serve on the board until certain project benchmarks. And that's not a conflict of interest. That's literally how the system is set up. So, you know, without context, a lot of times it's hard to give, you know, helpful answers because context matters. It could be that you say, okay, well, this isn't a new build community, and this is just a company that owns several units in the association. And you're like, all right, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a conflict of interest for the owner of the company and another one of their, you know, employees to serve as these directors. It's, are they acting in the best interest of the association? Are they fulfilling their fiduciary duty? Are they engaging in reasonable due diligence? You know, it's definitely, if there were that scenario, you know, you always want to be like, that's why we spend so much time on fiduciary duty. So
Yeah.
let's say there is that scenario listening, they can go back and be, yep, we're doing the due diligence, asking the questions, loyalty.
Yeah, you know, I feel like we see a lot of scenarios where it makes it real tricky for that to be the case, where they're acting in the best interest of the community. Okay, can we obtain a copy of the session? We are recording it. I am hoping that the recording will come out all good and everything. And in which case, if it does, what I'm going to send you guys is the link to download the full text, which is basically a board member training booklet that Jasmine mostly wrote. Some of it came from Steve Wild.
Sure did.
And then I will send you a link that you can watch this video, or you can share it with other board members that weren't able to participate. Even sometimes new community managers might benefit from seeing this, understanding the questions of the board.
And it's helpful to know that, like, this is kind of, you know, board training light, We also have a very, I'll say, specialized version of this for directors that are in new communities to try and help transition you from developer constructed to homeowner operated. There are, certainly some unique things that communities at what I'm going to call their infancy come across. And so the type of information that I cover tonight is not necessarily all the information that I would cover at like a training workshop for a transitioning community. So just know that, again, context matters so much. So,
And we do, if you're a new homeowner board member coming out of developer control, we do a specialized training on that. Just reach out to me. I can help you with that. We have a book on it too, and I can happy to send you that. Okay, we're trying to get through as many as these. We're already over time, but how does familial status protections impact HOA rules regarding kids playing, sports equipment, etc.?
well, the association familial status is a protected category, certainly under California law. And so you cannot make policies that are discriminatory on familial status basis. So, I get this question not infrequently, and it could say, the rules say no skateboarding in the common areas. And you're like, well, that might be perceived as, discriminatory to familial status because you're kind of targeting children or minors. You may want to say a different way of approaching what could very likely be a safety-based issue is, no engaging in recreational activities in the community fire lanes, which are all the roads, because we, don't have any sidewalks and whatnot. So sometimes it's the way in which the information is phrased can either make it discriminatory or help it to be outside of being discriminatory.
Okay, who determines what qualifies for an emergency assessment? Provide examples like insurance premium, paint, certain plumbing.
The board of directors determines if a emergency assessment exists, but the civil code, section 5610, sets the criteria for a board's approval of something being an emergency special assessment.
I'm going to ask a question on this on my own. What takes precedent, the civil code or the governing docs?
Well, that's a hard one to answer because Civil Code 4205 says the hierarchy of authority, the law, so not just the civil code, the law would prevail in the event of a conflict. But then there are many times where the civil code will say, if the CC&Rs or if your governing documents state otherwise. So it's hard to answer that question because it's going to depend on the issue.
Yeah.
But as for emergency assessments, it's a statutory matter.
It's a good one. What happens when no one wants to be on the board and it goes to receivership? How much does it cost?
Oh, Lord. So this one I get posed often because they're like, can't we just not be on the board and we'll have the receiver and it'll be better? And the answer is it's not better. Because right now, what volunteer homeowners are doing at no cost to the association, someone like me, an attorney typically, is appointed as the receiver. And they are going to bill you their, $500, $600, $700 an hour to operate the association. And so think about that. You're like, ooh, so that reading all those contracts, reviewing all those financials, having those conversations with the vendor about getting the trees trimmed, talking to management, having these board meetings, all that gets billed. And because it's a court order, every homeowner is obligated to pay their whatever, pro rata version of assessments is. And so receivership is an absolute last resort for, I've worked with thousands of HOAs over the last 20 years. I've seen 3 have receivership. So let that sink in. It's an extraordinary remedy that should not be seen as the panacea to fix the issues. That's when, community residents should really look around and be like, we need to resolve this level of apathy in our community. Because I don't know about you, my home is the biggest damn investment that I have. It's why you joined your board. You're like, oh, hell, this is expensive, and I'm like, you want to protect that. And so I really Like, when you get the letter from Jasmine that's like, so receivership's on the horizon, it's not a pleasant letter to get, so, there you go.
All right, what should go into minutes and what should not?
That's a whole discussion, so. They're not intended to be a transcript, but they're also. Not supposed to be, you know, so sparse that like, it just says, you know, the board approved the contract. I mean, that would be hard to, well, which one? So I encourage. Obviously, motions and whether they were seconded and passed or failed needs to be in the minutes. I think if discussion has occurred, but not necessarily any decisions were made, I would identify the board discussed the utility infrastructure project by the utility company. And this is where wheels start falling off the bus when you have board members that are sort of split over the issue. Well, I want the minutes, making sure it notes in the minutes that I said X, and you're like, no, I'm not doing that. Because then other person's like, no, I want to note it in the minutes, da, 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 da. And so I think noting that a discussion occurred is appropriate, but trying to strip out the, you know, these people said this and those people said that. You know, your minutes should identify like what happened at a meeting, but not the nitty gritty.
And posting on a nasty gram on Nextdoor is no bueno. Yes,
Well.
yeah, no bueno.
Well, so as a human being, it's kind of crappy to post nasty things anywhere. I mean, you may have those thoughts, but let's try to like lower the level of rancor that we're seeing, not just, you know, on a micro environment within a community association, but on a macro environment, you know, in terms of nationally. So I would encourage, it's okay to have disputes and differences of opinion, but let's really try to bring back some civility. Because the only way that's actually gonna happen is if we choose to do it. And it can't be, well, until Jill says nice things first, it's no, you know, the gloves are off. And, you know, so just know that like you can be part of the solution in terms of like turning around community discord.
So someone's asking if we're connected to a particular management company and if they have a more, if there is a more generic presentation that this management company, others can deliver to board members. I'll tell you what, every single management company in the state knows a Birding a While. We've been around for 37 years. They know who we are, so.
The
They
reality.
often have their own materials.
Yeah, I was gonna say, a lot of management companies do have their own board trainings. I encourage board members to take up all the education and resources that your management companies have. You know, I do these board trainings for clients routinely. They are something that they pay to do. There's a lot of information that we certainly did not cover today, I mean, just in the interest of time. But there's
Specificity, right?
yeah, I was gonna say, there's a lot of specificity that I won't know if I'm just talking to a sort of random general group of board members like yourselves versus, oh, I'm sitting down with HOA X and, you know, hey, these are the specific issues our HOA is encountering. I'm able to like put that information into a much more meaningful presentation for board members. So this is something that was by its design generally intended. We definitely do these types of things, not just me, but you know, most attorneys in the industry, we do these things, you know, for client stuff routinely.
Someone's laughing at me for even bringing up Nextdoor. What is the role of the treasurer?
The role of the treasurer is they are supposed to be a CPA. I'm totally kidding. The civil code requires all board members to review on a monthly basis the association's financials. So that's, you know, responsibility. The treasurer is the one who's generally going to be the liaison with management. If you have a, you know, outside management company, or if you have an inside one, with making sure the financials are, you know, correct and accurate. It doesn't mean that the rest of the board doesn't review the financials. It's just that's their designated role, is the one who's liaising with that.
And then with the recent law changing to $100 maximum fine, are we seeing an increase in homeowners just doing as they please because it will only cost them $100? Have you had an increase?
I think that there are some homeowners who are emboldened. I was feeling particularly petty after the law was passed, being super candid. And I was like, hey, everybody, let's like go in $100 a lawyer and go park some really ugly motorhomes and, rat nest on wheels in front of the statute's author's house and see how she likes it, but no one was feeling that petty that day, so there you go. I've called it garbage. It's a really, really problematic law for so many reasons. But it's our problematic, terrible law. So until we can hopefully make an impact on a legislative front next year, it's what we're stuck with.
And go watch our webinar on AB 130, which I brought up earlier, because we do cover this a bit and there's some other strategies that you could maybe think about using. How to best handle highly litigious owners.
I am not allowed to say billy clubs and back alleys. So that is not one of my answers. Document. Engage legal counsel. I hate it that that's a response, but boards that try to go it alone. I mean, there's a reason why I have a doctorate and had to go through a lot of training. It's because I'm able to step in and help assist. Sometimes it's, just to help provide a buffer. And so, how to deal with highly litigious owners is, carefully.
Okay, I'm gonna do my best to read this question clearly. If HOA is missing Davis Sterling required documents, do I need a board decision or board approval to email a vendor or actively collect that document? For example, tax returns or vendor maintenance documents. Can I, as a board member, have access to all HOA documents?
So the Corporations Code, section 8334, actually provides that directors are entitled to all association records. And so, but there's some caveats to that. Just like I said at the beginning of the presentation, that they're the corporation's records. They're not the director's records. And so, I could be the director and be like, management company, I want, all these records. Management company may say, well, we're gonna need to get a board approval because it's gonna take me 15 hours to assemble all these records that you're asking for, and that's gonna cost the association money. So, it could be that the board's like, why do you need all these records? So there's a nuanced answer to that, which is, yes, board members are supposed to have access to all of the records. There are times, I've had individuals who I've had the, as counsel to send, cease and desist letters to for, what a prior board has said was, conduct violating GovDocs. Those people get on the board sometimes and they're like, first thing they do. So Jasmine, why don't you send me my homeowner file? And my response is, I'm happy to do that as soon as the board instructs me to do so. That's going to be an open meeting discussion. So you put that on the agenda and then let me know. And so far, I've never had anyone take me up on that. So, context matters. What information is being asked? Is there a reason why the board isn't providing it? Is it because the information doesn't exist? So it's definitely something that should be, further explored.
All right, so confirmation of the email to get involved in terms of legislation, caiclac.com is correct.
Yes.
caiclac.com.
Yes.
Easy for me to say. Okay, in your opinion, how often is it recommended for boards to meet?
The civil code requires boards to meet at least once a quarter. So you can meet more frequently. The law has the minimum number you're supposed to meet, and everything from there is going to be a board business decision. There are some boards that meet every other week, and you're like, oh Lord, that's so much. And then those boards may say, but we have so many different issues and this works for them. And others may say, yeah, meeting once every 3 months is okay. A lot of boards that I work with seem to meet monthly, and that seems to be an effective schedule. So it's really what's in the board's, what's the majority of the board members, perspective on that.
All right, what is management's duty in responding to members versus board members? How does the board know how management prioritizes inquiries? How do they balance this?
Very good question, Debbie. The answer to that is, you know, what's in your management contract? Some management contracts have as one of the services management is supposed to provide a, you know, duty to be that responding arm to community, you know, community members and residents. Other management contracts may not have that as one of the services that management's supposed to provide. So it's, you know, something that look at your service contract to just to understand who's supposed to be doing what. And then in terms of, you know, how do we know if they're prioritizing? The answer to that is have a dialogue. And, you know, if you have concerns, like let's say you go to a board meeting and you got a bunch of members that are like, I wrote management and they never responded. You know, let's ask the question of management, hey, Bill from unit 102 said he had written you and you hadn't responded. And, you know, sometimes it could be, yeah, that's correct. Other times it could be, no, we did respond to unit 102. They don't like the answer. And so I'm always gonna recommend that boards ask questions and give, you know, management the opportunity to provide the information, because sometimes a member may have a perception management hasn't responded, and you're like, they show you the like 5 emails that you responded, and you're like, no, they responded to you. You appear not to like the information, but that's a different than they never responded. So there we go.
Someone's asking if all our upcoming trainings are on our website, and I'll tell you the best way to get information on any of our trainings is on our website. You can sign up for our newsletter. We send out newsletters on any kind of this kind of training we're doing. We also do some different in-person type of trainings. Also social media. So follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. We post all of this and the links on those platforms as well. If you have questions, just email me. I will, like I said earlier, I'll be responding to everybody who registered for this with the information that I promised today. Okay, is there any instance where the HOA would not be responsible for repair of attic structure and multi-unit buildings damaged by termites?
It's 100% going to be based on what your documents say. So I can't answer that question without reading the documents.
Is the $100 fine cap per violation, or can it be per month for the same violation?
We're going to say, watch the webinar. We've addressed that topic there extensively.
How to deal with a fellow board member who is potentially threatening litigation against the HOA from an incident that occurred prior to them joining the board?
Carefully. So very, very carefully, because now they are a board member. So you're going to want to make sure there are appropriate protocols in place in terms of sharing information with Director X. I will typically, in that kind of circumstance, recommend that the board consider forming an executive committee. It's not to like ice the person out, but it is, you know, the board's responsibility is to protect the association. And, you know, if you're a person who, you know, board member or not, has a, you know, adverse interest to the association, you can still remain a board member, but you shouldn't be voting as a director on, you know, should we tender the lawsuit I just filed against the association?
Right.
No, you shouldn't vote on that. Like, you should recuse yourself.
Talk about conflict of interest.
Yeah, so there we go.
Okay.
I can't tell you the civil code off the top of my head. I'm good, but like, damn, that one, I would.
For quarterly meetings, someone's asking, what's the civil code for quarterly meetings?
It's gotta be in like the 4900s in the Open Meeting Act part. So like we can try and get that to you offline.
All right, what is a reasonable amount of time for board members to respond to emails from management company?
I mean,
It's a tough one to answer.
yeah, it's like, it's gonna in part depend on like content. I mean, if management says, hey, you know, like, I need an urgent response so that I can give a vendor direction, you know, they just asked this question, it hadn't been contemplated. And they say, I need to know by the end of the day, it would be good for the board members to, you know, provide the answer by the end of the day. It could be, I mean, I would say try to act reasonably, is it good to not respond in a week? I mean, maybe it's a really complicated issue and you need to weigh on it. I would at least acknowledge management's communication if you're like, hey, I need to like take time to reflect on this or review this information, I'll get back to you by X, like it's held, like that's part of respectful communication protocols,
Professionals, yeah.
I try to do it, I sometimes, fail, I'm a human, but I, try to do it with my own clients. If a client sends an email, be like, hey, I got your email, just wanted to acknowledge that we've got it, we're, ETA is a week.
All right, should board members abstain or engage in informal community chats, like in WhatsApp, with the remark that whatever is posted there is not a board decision / advice?
Well, my position is that I recommend boards avoid these types of discussions. I understand some are like, yeah, but I think it's a really important, helpful way to keep people up to date, and I respect that. Again, it's because I'm counsel and my objective is to try and lower the association's liability. What happens, like, I'll give you a very real example. We had a community, they had a WhatsApp group, and we're not exactly sure how this happened, but a really terrible, like, racial attack on one of the directors was used in a WhatsApp group. And, if the board members had not been a part of the WhatsApp group, maybe they wouldn't have known that it had happened, but it then, required a really extensive investigation, because I'm not on WhatsApp, so I don't exactly know how it works, but it's all like,
Like text
it's like anonymized numbers.
Well, maybe, or it can show you who the contact is.
And so we had to go like down a rabbit hole in terms of trying to identify who the sender of the communication that, was really an absolutely appalling racial attack. And so, it's easier for people to go off the rails when they're communicating behind a screen or a keyboard. So, I mean, the law, just so everyone's very clear, like the law intends that the board engages with the community at a board meeting, like an open board meeting. And that's where the board makes its decisions, could be executive session or open. And so,
We're down to the last 4 questions. Okay.
all right.
What should happen if if you have a board member that doesn't attend meetings or respond to emails?
Well, you may want to ask that director if they want to remain a director. Not participating is actually a violation of their duty. So if you're like, yeah, I've been a board member, but I haven't really opened anything in 6 months and I haven't been to a board meeting in 6 months. It's okay to ask the question like, hey, we totally respect that life happens. Would you consider, dropping off the board so that we can appoint someone who maybe has a better availability to, volunteer their time for the association? If not, we really need for you to participate.
They probably won't respond though.
Yeah,
Okay, 2 or more board members discuss board issues outside of a board meeting.
depends on the number of board members that you have.
Let's say they have 4, 5, okay.
Then yes, 2 members could. Because it wouldn't be a quorum and,
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they have 2, no.
correct.
Okay.
That's why I asked depends on the number.
Is it allowable to share past information of board business with current board members?
I'm not exactly understanding the context of the question. Obviously, when you become a board member, you're certainly able and you're entitled to understand what prior boards did. So I guess if I understood the context of the question, I'd probably be able to give a more articulate answer.
Can minutes from executive meetings be shared if requested by board members during an open board meeting?
If a majority of the board voted yes, then it could, but the legislature has authorized the boards to have executive meetings, so they're they're disclosed that they're happening to homeowners, but they're closed in terms of homeowners having the right to participate in them. You know, I respect that the legislature has authorized boards to be able to have these meetings and, you know, a lot of times the discussions or the information is confidential, in which case, hey, maybe we shouldn't. So it's not that they can't, it's if the majority of the board votes sure, but I would do that very carefully. I would consult with management, you may want to consult with legal counsel to kind of understand, you know, the context of that decision.
Any idea when the recording of this presentation, they said excellent, by the way, presentation will be made available. I'm gonna try to have it done tomorrow.
By the end of the week.
Could the board's development of a matrix of responsibilities, HOA versus homeowner or versus owner, become liability to the board?
If it was not consistent with what the governing documents say, I suppose, yes. If the board is trying to develop a maintenance responsibility matrix on their own, I would really encourage them to seek legal counsel. It's not to generate legal fees for, you know, me and the other attorneys across the industry. It's more of a function of these are complex documents. They are sometimes difficult to interpret. I've been banging the pavement in this industry for like 20 years. And I read documents sometimes I'm like, holy hell, this is challenging. So I, you know, would encourage board members, that goes back to that, you know, using experts, you know, subject matter experts where appropriate. So I would probably encourage the board not to develop their own internal matrix and rather have that, you know, created or reviewed, prepared by, you know, an outside subject matter expert.
Okay, final question. What topics are appropriate for executive sessions versus open sessions? What topics should the board be of discussing over email or other communication methods outside of board meeting?
So the appropriate topics for executive session are in the Davis-Sterling Act. It's formation of third-party contracts, member discipline, pending litigation, votes to foreclose, votes for payment plans, and personnel issues. So that's what the civil code says boards can. Every once in a while, I'll be like, so then you can't talk with your attorney in executive session? No, of course you can. It's not in the Davis-Sterling Act, but it's, you know, we've got 1,000 years of jurisprudence that says attorney-clients communications are intended to be confidential. So you can meet with your lawyer in executive session as well.
All right, that's it. Thank you guys for attending.
Thank you guys so much.
I'll be in touch. Reach out if you need anything. Thank you.